Hi, everyone. This one is called Decoding Dualism. And this one is part of two lessons about the existence of souls. We're going to look at two different sides of the issue. And today we'll be focusing on the dualistic side. So, arguments for and against the existence of souls. Now, the first thing that we should do in this particular debate is look at the concepts because we have to define them very specifically. There's actually quite a few different versions of each kind of view on both sides of this issue. So let me just discuss what I'll be focusing on, the kind of materialism and dualism that I'll be focusing on. So for us in this course, materialism will be used in its classical sense, meaning that it's the view that the only things that exist are things that occupy space, things whose existence depends on things that occupy space, and the void, right? That space in which things that occupy space interact with each other. If you would like to know where this originally came from, the first one who really espoused something specifically like this in the most concrete way was, I would say, Democritus. Now we're talking 2000 plus years ago. And his whole view was about atoms. All that really exists are atoms and void, right? So all that an atom is something that occupies space and it has particular properties. It's not exactly the kind of atom that we think of today, but just think of an atom in the sense that Democritus meant it as something that occupies space, and you can make compounds of them such that everything that exists on our planet is simply a compound made out of atoms. So, what you have to get out of your head is the idea that you can split atoms and you can find even smaller things. We won't get into that here. So, atoms are all that exist, and there is a void, just an empty space in which these things interact with each other, these atoms interact with each other. Given the way that I'm presenting this, it is probably not surprising that this view sounds like it fits in with a couple of other views. This view fits in with atheism quite well. If you believe in God, typically you are not the Greek type of monotheist. You believe in the God of the Semitic religions, right? Christianity, Judaism, Islam. And in these religions, God is presumed to be not physical, right? He is not made out of atoms. He is not made out of, I don't know, plutonium and other things. He would be a non physical thing. Well, materialists don't believe in that. So they naturally are atheists. The only kind of, I mean, I guess if you want to have a weird view, you can believe in gods and be a materialist, but only if gods are physical. So maybe they're, you might think of aliens as gods if they're super powerful. But in the traditional sense, when you think of God, you don't think of that. So we're going to just treat it as highly compatible with atheism. And it's also highly compatible with naturalism. Naturalism is the view that the only valid explanations, the only explanations that have any actual explanatory power are explanations that contain only natural phenomena, so purely naturalistic explanations. My recurring example for this is if you believe in ghosts, right? If you want to know why some particular house, something bad always happens in it, you might say, oh, it's ghosts. Well, that would be a non naturalistic explanation. The naturalist would say, well, maybe it has something to do with the sorts of people that can afford the house and socioeconomic status and the neighborhood and all these physical natural things. So natural here, it just means not supernatural. It doesn't necessarily mean, occurring in nature. So materialism just fits right in with atheism and naturalism. On this view, a materialist simply believes that mental states, that your mind, your mental life, that's just a product of your physical, material brain. That's all it really is. There's nothing special going on in the sense that it isn't a non physical soul. When your brain dies, so does your mental life. It ends essentially because they believe it's only atoms and void, no souls whatsoever. So you can kind of see that materialism, it just fits in very well. It coheres very well with a series of largely atheistic viewpoints, scientific viewpoints. Okay. Dualism also comes in various flavors. Um, dualism that we're focusing on, the dualism that we're focusing on, is substance dualism. This is the view that two types of substances exist. Things that occupy space, right, like atoms, they believe in atoms as well, but also non material minds. So, according to this view, minds are not the products of brains, minds are non physical, right? That's the main bit, right? There is a non physical soul that accounts for all your mental life, and it is, the center of cognition. That's where all your thinking happens in your soul. And also, maybe it carries your personality with you, right? Who you are essentially as a person is in your non physical soul, right? Not your brain. And so these are pretty standard views in substance dualism. This is what it really is. I will also add here that typically when you consider someone who believes in substance dualism, they believe that the soul is eternal and maybe even unchanging, right? So the idea isn't that the soul will exist for a little bit. The idea is that it will continue to exist after you die eternally, right? Either in heaven or in hell, preferably heaven, I think we would all agree. And maybe also it is unchanging in general, right? Maybe you mature over time and all that, but who you are fundamentally as a person tends to remain the same. So those are two extra little, caveats that usually come with substance dualism. But the meat of it, the real substance of substance dualism, is that minds are non-physical, right? So souls are the seat of your cognition and who you are fundamentally as a person. Both of these views have had facelifts in recent times. I will not cover those views, but just know that, things get complicated, right? So you might eventually run into different flavors of both materialism and dualism. The different kinds of materialism are so different that they don't even call it materialism anymore. They call it sometimes physicalism, but I'm already getting into it more than I wanted to. Let's keep going here. Let's look at arguments for dualism first. Well, one argument for dualism that I'll begin the discussion with comes from Rene Descartes. Descartes essentially argued from introspection. He looked within himself and he discovered something. And based on, these inferences, based on reason, based on what he seemed to know about his, subjective experience, he decided, I think there are souls. So, what is that argument? He says, I can doubt the existence of my physical body and, in fact, all other material objects, but I cannot doubt the existence of my mind. Okay, what's going on here? Well, he has very famous arguments, the argument from dreams, the evil demon argument, where he basically says, I feel like I can challenge everything. Everything, really. I don't even know that I'm not dreaming right now. I don't know that I'm not in some kind of, simulation that some demon put me in, such that I don't even really have a body. And what I think are chairs and desks in front of me aren't really chairs and desks. So he thinks he can doubt everything about the physical world, but he says, you know what I can't doubt? I can't I can't doubt that I'm thinking right now. This is sometimes called the cogito argument because in Latin it's something like I think, therefore I am, cogito ergo sum. And so that is the basic gist of the argument. He at least knows one thing, but based on that one thing that he knows, that he exists in that moment that he's thinking, he realizes that there's got to be two distinct types of things in the world. The physical things are doubtable, but I can't doubt that I'm a thinking thing. Thinking things must exist then, just independently. It must be that they're not physical because you can't doubt them. You can doubt everything physical, but you can't doubt your non physical soul. Okay, well, there is one argument. It seemed to carry weight, at least with him. Various people from his day and a little bit after, well, they didn't think too much of the argument. I will give you a very famous objection by Kant because I think, it's not the easiest to understand, but some people think this is the one, right? This is the one that really takes the wind out of the sails of this argument from Descartes. So here is Immanuel Kant. He says something like this, and I'll try to translate for you as we go. Although there is a unity to my present consciousness, it tells me nothing about the kind of thing that my consciousness is. So I'm going to actually quote Kant himself here. It is quite impossible, by means of simple self consciousness, to determine the manner in which I exist, whether it be as substance or accident, in other words, property. Okay, here is a translation. He recognizes that it might feel that we are an essentially thinking substance that is not physical. But he says, but it could also be the case, it seems fairly obvious, that we might be a property of our brains. In other words, our mental life might simply be the product of our physical brain. And here's what he says. It seems that by self consciousness alone, by just sitting there and reflecting, you can't tell. Just by looking within yourself, that's not the mode of discovery for what we are fundamentally. And so he rejects this argument because he's basically saying to Descartes, you're not using the right tool. This is not what simple self consciousness is for. Now, he will go on to make his own arguments, and those are extremely complicated, so I won't get into them. But the objection here against Descartes is a fairly good one. You can't discover what you are fundamentally by closing your eyes and thinking really hard, right? That's just not how it works. By looking within, that won't do the trick. Okay, let's move in a different direction here, and let's talk about paranormal phenomena. Paranormal phenomena is basically, we'll talk about a couple here. Why not? I don't want to talk about astrology, to be honest. Let's talk about palmistry and reading the tarot cards and all that. Let's talk about the Ouija board, right? Let's talk about spirits, right, and fate and that kind of thing. Some people, let's focus on spirits for a second. Some people think that the mere existence of spirits shows very well that we, while we are alive, we are simply a spirit in a body, and that when our body dies, our spirit will be set free and will be roaming around, and it will show that it is a soul, right, fundamentally. So if you believe in this kind of thing, right, your soul has a particular fate, and there's spirits running around disembodied, and they can go through walls and stuff, that means that non-physical spirits do exist. Even demons are supportive of this, right? Because that kind of fits in with the whole worldview where a spirit lives on after it dies. And if it was a bad spirit, it goes to hell and gets punished for eternity. Or if it goes to heaven, well, it hangs out with the angels and such. So the existence of paranormal phenomena like spirits that is exactly what propels some to believe, well, there must be some kind of spirit. We must all be souls. Okay. Well, it's not exactly clear how one ought to proceed here, but I'm going to go ahead and give you a fairly common response from materialists. And here's what they might say. Look, the truth of, spiritual phenomena is extremely dubious, right? Highly suspect. So we actually have examples from, the modern age that are not terribly promising for those who want to say that spirits exist or that they can communicate with spirits. So it used to be the case that, people believed in demonic possessions. Beginning with the Enlightenment period, some people were explaining what seemed like a demon inside of someone as actually being a psychiatric malady, right? There's something wrong um, in the, well, I was going to say in the brain, but there's something wrong with the person's psyche, right? The mind. And so that's what it really is. There is no such thing as demons. What you think is a demonic possession really is maybe schizophrenia or some other disorder. Okay. What about people that say they speak to spirits? Well, they've been debunked publicly. I mean, it is fairly embarrassing when this happens. If you want a, fairly watchable set of, YouTube videos, you can check out James Randi, the great James Randi. Um, so he was a magician, and he thought it was wrong for people to profit off, allegedly communicating with spirits, and they would get money. These mediums would get money from family members who wanted to talk to their dead loved ones. This guy, the magician James Randi, thought it was wrong, and he basically publicly outed various people, and they would try to show that they really were the legit, and he would basically embarrass them, just kind of showing how they did their little tricks to make it seem like they were speaking to spirit demons or had some kind of telekinesis or whatever. So the point is, materialists come at you pretty hard on this point that all these things that are called paranormal phenomena, there is a perfectly naturalistic explanation for all of them. Okay, some other arguments for dualism that I'm not really going to take too seriously here, but I'll show you why, right? One of them is Plato's doctrine of the forms. If you buy Plato's doctrine in general, you sort of get souls for free, right? If you believe that forms exist and that the way that we know them is because we existed in Platonic heaven as souls before we were born, well, then there you go. It just comes with souls, right? But a lot of people are not Platonists. And there's a whole line of philosophical argumentation that runs pretty hard against Platonism. It goes by a couple of different names: nominalism, anti-realism. We don't need to get into that. This is actually just biting off more than you can chew, right? To try to save souls, people will try to defend a whole a whole system of belief, right, from Plato, and that's really difficult. That's actually adding more problems because there's so many moving parts to Plato's theories that there's just actually more vulnerabilities, more places where people can attack you. The other one that I'm not going to take too seriously is free will. Some people say free will is proof that we have souls. Well, the way that we came at this, problem is by looking for a solution to the free will problem. So we wanted to know, do we have free will? And that's why we're looking at souls. Maybe souls, which are non-physical, are what give us free will because they are not bound by physical law, right? If your soul is not physical at all, then it doesn't matter what the laws of nature's say. They don't have to listen to it. So determinism doesn't apply to a soul, and that's why you have free will. Well, we can't really take that avenue because we can't say, oh, free will is proof that we have souls. oh, and souls are proof that we have free will. That would be a circular argument. So we need some independent reason for believing in the existence of non-physical souls, right? Substance dualism. Well, let's flip the script then. Let's look at arguments against dualism. Let's see what you think. The first one is by Thomas Hobbes. Now, Hobbes is writing in the 17th century, and Hobbes essentially tried to give us an argument by Occam's razor. He says, look, if we can explain all the workings of the mind just through physical causes, just through material things alone, right? Just by talking about brains and environments, well, then why would we need to suppose the existence of some non-physical, substance, some kind of soul? Well, that is Hobbes' argument. Let me say this: it seems that it's valid, right? It seems that if we can come up with a very good explanation of how the mind works, and it has nothing to do with souls, then maybe we aren't justified in believing in souls. The problem with Hobbes' argument, though, is it might not be sound. And here is my basic, summary of the problem here. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say no one really knows how consciousness arises. No one's fully explained how brains produce, our mental lives. And you can read books, recent books on how consciousness works, and they will tell you, look, here's the leading theory. Here's what I think it's true. None of them, as far as I know, say, hey man, we got it. We solved everything. There's a lot of lingering questions. One book that I recently read is Anil Seth's Being You. So the guy, Anil Seth, is a neuroscientist, and he gives a wonderful explanation of how he thinks consciousness works. And then he says, well, but you know what? There's still a lot of, wrinkles to iron out here. So maybe when we get that theory of consciousness that explains everything, maybe we can look on Hobbes' argument and say, oh, boom, we're settled. But we don't quite yet have that. So here's another one. The correlation and dependence argument. Let me give you the gist here, then we'll talk about it. It looks like our mental events are explicable through, related to, or dependent on some physical event. Okay, what does that mean? Well, pain corresponds to the stimulus of A or C fibers. Okay, so pain is a very, it's a mental experience, right? Pain hurts a lot, and it sort of distracts you if you're in pain, and if you're in a lot of pain, you can't think of anything but the pain. So it definitely is a part of your mental life, but it seems to be completely dependent on some physical stuff, A fibers and C fibers. If you stimulate those, you will feel pain. And you can look at those, you can find them, right? Those, you can grab a microscope and look at an A fiber. And so that's a physical thing. It seems like the mental is correlated and dependent upon the physical. So why assume that the mental is something other than the physical? Here's another one, memory, right? If you get really hit hard, if you get hit really hard in the head, you will get amnesia. You will lose some of your memories. Well, that's a physical thing, your brain. And if you hit it the right way, you lose memory. Memory is fairly mental. Some people, by the way, say that who you are fundamentally is just your memory. So if that's the case, why is it physical, right? If dualism is true, then who you are fundamentally is not physical. But memory is physical, right? And some people say that memory is who you are. So this seems to support the materialist side. Why assume that we have some non-physical soul when your memory, your experience of pain, it's all based on physical things? The hippocampus, A and C fibers, whatever. Let me give you what I think is the best argument here. Physical substances, drugs and alcohol, they affect your mental experience. If who you are fundamentally as a person is a non physical soul, then physical substances should have no effect on you. Just like a soul or a spirit can walk through a wall because you're not physical, the same thing should happen with a soul and things like, alcohol. It shouldn't affect it at all. It should just go right through you because you're not physical. But it does. Alcohol does affect your mental life. Clearly, then, it seems like if you're being even handed about this, you are physical. You must be the product of your physical brain. That is the correlation and dependence argument. Let me give you the top notch argument against dualism. It's called the mind body problem. And it basically says that even, let me put it this way, I'm going to paraphrase here, but dualism cannot possibly be true. It's not a matter of whether it's true or not. It can't even be true. It's incoherent. All right. So that is, the argument in a nutshell. Let's flesh it out. If dualism is true, then the soul, which is not physical, controls the body, which is physical. But it is physically impossible for a non physical thing to interact with a physical thing, right? Just like spirits can go through walls, we believe that. Well, it's because non physical things don't have anything to do with physical things. They're just, I'm not even sure how we can see them, right? If they exist, because light doesn't bounce off of them. So the point here is dualism is false. It doesn't seem like there's any way for a soul to control a body. There's no way for dualism to work out, in other words. That is kind of a big deal. I mean, this is telling the dualist, your theory is, incoherent in that even if souls did exist, they wouldn't be able to control your body. They would be completely useless. They would be causally inert. They wouldn't do anything because they're not physical. Only physical things can interact with other physical things. Well, this is such a big deal that quite a few philosophers wanted to respond to it. They didn't like it, which makes sense. So Descartes himself thought that the way that the soul interacts with the body is through the pineal gland. So you can actually see it in the middle of this diagram here, labeled L. Descartes was wrong. The pineal gland, is just for regulating your circadian rhythm, your sleep cycle. So no, it's not the pineal gland. That's not how it works. Let's look at other ways to attempt to solve this problem. And I'm going to be a little brisk here because some of these views are sort of bananas. They're not very well regarded. Some people want to take them super seriously, but I'll tell you what they are, and then you'll see. Oh, that's kind of weird. So, according to Malebranche, Nicolas Malebranche, the person who's putting forward the mind-body problem is assuming that the soul actually interacts with the body. But Malebranche is going to say, no, 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 no. The soul doesn't interact with the body at all. It's actually God that causes everything, everything. So whenever the soul looks like it's interacting with the body, it's actually God that's doing it. So if we look at this diagram here, let's just say the soul is hungry and it wants to have a cookie because cookies are amazing. And so it should, if on the typical interactionist view, the one that the person who is advancing the mind body argument believes in, the soul will try to communicate with the body in some way, telling the body, hey, you should go reach for a cookie now because we want a cookie. Well, Malebranche is saying the soul does not in any way interact with the body. It only does so indirectly through God. God is looking at the soul. God is seeing, oh, the soul wants a cookie. Awesome. Let me reach out to that soul's body and make the body get the cookie. You see how that works? Not incredibly appealing. Basically, every single moment of the day when you are willing to do things. I want to move my arm now. I want to get my backpack. I want to go outside. I want to eat a cookie. God is actually doing all of it. He's like a constantly attending to your every will and desire. This paints God in a very different light. He kind of is always just making sure that your soul does whatever, that your body does whatever your soul wants it to do. That is super weird. Also, this view is utterly incompatible with the laws of nature because God is basically just always intervening and doing stuff. So this view has a lot going against it. It's also just kind of sounds preposterous. So that's one way to get around um, the mind body problem. Doesn't sound like a lot of fun. It doesn't sound very plausible, and so we're going to go ahead and put that down. And here is another view. This one, by the way, I should go back here. This one is called Occasionalism, this view by Nicholas Malebranche, Occasionalism. And the other view that we're going to cover is called Parallelism, as you can see here with the parallel lines. On this view, which comes from Leibniz, Gottfried Leibniz, there's actually no causation at all, right? So in the other view we looked at, God is the causal agent that's looking at the soul, see what it wants, and it makes the body do what the soul wants. According to the materialists, there's also causation because things are always interacting with each other. According to Leibniz, though, there's actually no causation at all, zero, like none. When it looks like there's causation, it's actually just a result of God having pre-established everything in some sort of concordance or agreement. So, in other words, let's look at the diagram here. Let's just say that we have a soul and a body, and over time, you see that when the soul wants a cookie, the body gets a cookie. And when the soul wants to lay down, the body lays down. And the soul wants some water, the body gets some water, right? So everything lines up perfectly. There is agreement between the desires of the soul and the actions of the body. Well, Leibniz says that's only because God sort of set everything up from the beginning so that the soul would want the things and the body would do the things at the exact same time. In other words, everything is like this great big, I don't know, wind up watch, and God kind of set everything up so that He just winds it up and lets it go, and everything's going to run on its own, and it's going to seem like things are causing each other, but there is actually no interaction between the soul and the body. It's just a case that at 11 o'clock on Tuesday, the soul is supposed to want a cookie, and so God programmed the body to at 11:02 on Tuesday to get a cookie. This might sound utterly preposterous to you, and it is, I think, a very cockamamie, way to get around the mind-body problem. It just sounds clearly post hoc, right? You have a problem, and so you invent some weird way to get around it. That's one objection. It just sounds implausible. Maybe a better objection is that this is actually not compatible with libertarian free will. Just think about it. You, your soul, and your body, they all got set up ahead of time so that they behave in a certain way. That's not libertarian free will. And in fact, Leibniz was a compatibilist. So there you go, two responses to the mind body problem. And neither one of them really seem to, give us what we want. So, welcome your questions and comments on this. All right, thanks.